So I should preface this by saying that I am definitely one of those people that I've only worked in private industry a few times in my life. But one of those times I worked on AI, and given how relevant that has now become, it seems like now is a good time to explain why I've kind of regretted that work ever since. And well, so I guess like they used to say, story time. So back in 2012, right when I was about to start graduate school, first of all, I was surprised that I got into grad school. I thought that I wouldn't. Turns out I'm not quite as incompetent as I thought, although I'm still pretty incompetent. Don't get me wrong. And in the summer between, I had a few months to spare, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. But then my parents basically said like, "Oh, hey, your dad, knows people at this company, and because internships aren't like for sort of for internships at a company that small, it's like it's kind of fine to sort of be a who nepo baby because it's like it was a paid internship, but it paid a little bit above minimum wage, and at a small company. But nonetheless, that's how I got it. And I should also say that one of the reasons that I ended up in physics over aerospace engineering was I kept applying to internships in aerospace engineering, and I couldn't find one. And this internship that I did get was at a sort of small tech company, and it's a internship for someone who's between undergrad and grad school. It didn't pay a whole lot, but I figured, hey, it'd be good to get some extra experience. And it was essentially doing programming, and that's something I don't have a computer science degree, but I'm thoroughly, I consider myself a thoroughly proficient coder, because I guess there's three things that people tend to assume are the same, but they're not, right? Because there's coding, there's computer science, and there's software engineering, and they overlap a lot, but they're not actually the same thing, right? I consider myself a fairly proficient coder, and I do know the mathematical underpinnings of computer science, but I would not know the best practices of actual software engineering if they bit me in the rear. So I, got this internship at this company. I was like, okay, cool, something to do, pays me a little bit of, lunch money. This will be nice. Living with my parents between undergrad and grad school, a few months to spare, awesome. So, I didn't have a car. My dad dropped me off the first day, and was like, oh, hey, this is based on, people I know. So, make sure you do a good job, et cetera, et cetera. And, a little bit of pressure, but nothing crazy. I was like, okay, this should be good. And so then, enter my sort of first day there. My boss actually pretty chill. My coworkers in the sort of research department also pretty chill, because it turns out it's not a huge company. I only had a couple hundred employees, but nonetheless, uh, the actual research and development team was like four people, one of whom was me, right? And then everybody else worked on the sort of there was a lot of people that worked on software development, but they worked on actually sort of shipping the product, right? Whereas we were the R&D, like the research side of the real sort of research side of things, I guess. And since I'm a physicist, that worked out very nicely. It turns out my boss also actually had a physics PhD from UCSD, so I think that's the other reason why I was able to get that. Is my dad kind of asked around, and the people at this company said, oh, our researcher also went to UCSD, maybe he has something, and then so how I got that. But nonetheless, so okay, first day there. First of all, I'm somebody that is, just in terms of like my own personal, sort of work habits and working there, I'm naturally somebody that one of the reasons I like the forms of science and engineering I do so much, is that I really enjoy sort of a mix of sort of sitting down and doing basically desk work and office work and things that involve a lot of sort of thinking and processing what I've done and planning out what I'm going to do, mixed with actual sort of hands-on lab work. And this was just 100% sitting at a desk, and so that took a little bit of getting used to. Although I'll say that it's one of those things where it's like the first few days are like, man, how am I going to get through this? After that, you get kind of used to it, and then a couple months in, it goes from how am I going to get through this to why am I getting through this? And at the end, which is the what I'm trying to get to ultimately, it's became like if you've seen that movie Bridge over the River Kwai, where it's my God, what have I done? What have I done? And so to explain what this company did slash does, it used to be, well, maybe I shouldn't say the name of the company, just but it's they're still not a huge company. But what they do is they make sort of like cameras that you put basically dash cams for fleet vehicles, right? But they were sort of I guess you call smart cameras. They were even in that day sort of some degree of onboard AI combined with a lot of back end sort of what we now call AI, machine learning processing of the data from those cameras. And so the primary purpose is just that there's a camera and they had accelerometers in the camera, and if the driver slammed on the brakes or got hit or whatever, or if the driver caused a collision, there would be the dash cam would automatically save the footage from that. Right, I think that's not an uncommon feature, but it was also connected to cellular networks so that it would automatically upload that footage too. And of course, being for fleet vehicles, it is sort of had a higher degree of standardization and stuff like that. Um, so I worked on two projects while I was there, though, and these are things that have now become sort of hallmarks of the sort of uh, actual sort of drivers in AI. Right? Because the whole time I was there, I trained exactly this many zero neural networks. And the reason for that is that I worked on two projects when I was there, which are the two drivers of AI. I worked on a project for training data, and I worked on a project for hardware. Right? And in neither case did I actually train a neural network. I just sort of laid out the things that were necessary to train one, or I evaluated the ability of one to do things, which is, of course, what most of the time is spent on. And so the first project I worked on was essentially just building a tagging tool, right? Because to this day, neural networks and machine learning, AI, is very heavily dependent on labeled data, right? Now there are more things where it's sort of a little bit less tagged. It's a little bit more like just using sort of web crawlers to just sort of process everything they can scoop from the internet. But it's still dependent on some amount of tagging. It's just that nowadays we tend to rely more on sort of tags that are built in. That's why they trained those language models so heavily on Reddit, right? Because Reddit is like pre-tagged, right? At the top level, you at the title of the thread, you have what it's about, and then each individual response to the thread is pre-weighted basically with the amount of upvotes that it gets. But so my project was to take images. I wasn't tagging the data. I was building a little like user interface so that other like high school interns could go in and use that tagging tool to take images that were being pulled in from the cameras. That it wasn't clear what was happening in the image, just that there was an image, and then those interns would sit there and manually put in what's in this image, right? And so I was building like a like a simple little interface for them to do that, because we wanted our own internal tool for doing that for whatever reason, and because hey, we have this intern, why not have them do it? And then it's of course then there's even the layers of interns, right? Because there's me doing that, and then there's the high school interns actually labeling the data. And to this day, it's kind of nothing has changed. Except now we rely even more on the unpaid labor of everybody just posting things to the internet. Not to mention, of course, as said, there still is a lot of very low paid people in sort of third world countries manually labeling training data using not that specific interface. That specific interface probably got deleted a long time ago because it was a rinky-dink thing built by some idiot 22-year-old intern. But things like that are very much in use to this day. So that's sort of regret number one, although I don't regret that one that badly, because that just, it was just, at least those people were, they were just high schoolers, and they were, being paid about what you'd expect to be paid as a high schooler, which was not much less than I was getting paid, which was not very much. But I mean, I didn't need very much money, and presumably neither did they, although I don't actually know. And so, you know, uh, the other project I worked on while I was there is the sort of more concerning one, and the one that definitely really left me with the "my God, what have I done" feeling. And that is where, like I said, there's two projects: one for training data, one for hardware, and the other one was basically evaluating how much computational power it would take to run a particular image processing library, right? Because like I said, this was all about images, right? And to this day, I have worked on I have used machine learning on and off over the years for a lot of things, but they have basically all been in the sort of image side and video side of things, right? I have basically never worked on sort of language models, right? I have worked on basically computer vision, right? So not I've never worked really on generative AI at all, and that's why the most useful thing is always the thing you understand the most, right? But that to me, the most useful form of AI is image recognition and computer vision. I have tried using all these different AI tools that are available now, and they're not totally useless. Even if you ignore the ethics questions, their usefulness is a little bit dubious, which is probably the only way we have out of the ethical dubiousness. Is just the fact that the less useful parts of the models will probably fall by the wayside. But then again, predictions are hard, especially about the future. So what do I know? But to me, the one thing that's really been useful has been essentially the massively improved reverse image search. Um, the ability to upload an image and say, "What is this?" To me, that's actually fairly useful. Now, I'm sure other people find other things useful, but that's what I have found. That's what I have gotten the most utility out of. But that's probably because that's what I've actually worked on, and I understand what the machine learning algorithms and AIs are actually doing when you give them an image to process. And so, like I said, one thing I worked on was tagging images so that you can go train a neural network on those images and say, like, this is a person, holding a cell phone. This is a person smoking a cigarette, doing whatever while they're sitting there, driving. Um, but the other part, what the hardware part was, we wanted to benchmark a particular computer vision library, right? So an AI that does image recognition, not generation. But the thing is, this whole company, right? These are for commercial fleet vehicles, right? So these are commercial drivers that are driving these vehicles. These are not retail dash cams for people to voluntarily put in their cars. They're dash cams that are put in fleet vehicles by the fleet vehicle, by the company, and then the driver just has to sit there with it, right? And the only reason that the Teamsters agreed to the original version of this camera was it was only forward facing, right? There was a camera that looked out at the road and it could see what the driver saw, right? But it wasn't looking at the driver and spying on them. So it was still a little bit, a little bit of a privacy invasion, but you always have a little bit less privacy at work than you do at home. And it wasn't actually spying on the driver, it was just looking out at the road, and it was probably more likely to exonerate the driver in the event of an accident than it was to expose them to sort of, additional liability. Although any halfway decent company, they should have, the company carries the insurance, and unless the driver is doing something wantonly negligent, like, DUI, then the company is the one that's ultimately on the hook for whatever happens. Then again, if you've noticed anything about companies these days, they're usually not doing things how they're supposed to, so you never know. But anyways, that was the original. That was why it was kind of the bait and switch, was because what I was working on was, we wanted to make a peripheral that was going to face the driver, and we wanted to see, could we run a computer vision library in real time that was going to track the driver's eye movements. And I thought, okay, this is a little bit creepy, but whatever. I don't want to disappoint these people, and it's not like they're ever going to do this. They were already saying, like, oh, the financials on it don't really work out. We're probably not going to actually sell these. And so what I did is, I got a little single board, like a little single board computer, sort of like a early version of, not an actual Raspberry Pi, but something like a Raspberry Pi, basically. And it's all like, okay, can this run this computer vision library fast enough that it can track the eye movements of the driver in real time? Right. And of course, the way I did that was, I took a video of myself. They gave me like a regular, not even one of the, they didn't give me one of the company's products. They just gave me like a little dash cam that they got from, regular, retail or whatever. And I just, put it on my dashboard and had it face me instead of the road, and like recorded myself driving for a few minutes. And then I, took the footage, ran it through this, took the footage, put it on the SD card for this little single board computer, put the library, installed the software library on that single board computer, and then I recorded multiple several minute segments of me driving, and I compared under different conditions and all this, right? How basically how many frames per second could the library process in real time, right? Even though it was processing pre-recorded video, but I would, evaluate how long it's 1 minute of video, how many minutes does it take to process that, right? Is it greater than or less than 1 minute? And then checking, like, okay, like, if I do every other frame, can it keep up? Every third frame, can it keep up? And so on and so forth, and seeing, sort of where things would lie with the particular hardware that I was using. So turns out that it was, the hardware that I was using was fast enough to run the library in what you could reasonably call real time. I don't remember what exact frame rate I ended up concluding that it could run at, but it was a frame, that's what I reported was basically like, okay, with this hardware, with this library, if we want this level of reliability, this is about how many frames per second you can expect under these conditions. Um, and well, I didn't really feel great about it because it definitely felt a little bit creepy. And like, this is a kind of getting to be a privacy violation. Like, yeah, I know a lot of workplaces have security cameras and stuff, but still, like, people out there, driving fleet vehicle all the time, like, it's a little bit weird because it's just staring at your face constantly. And not just that, but tracking what your eyeballs are doing, right? So, like, that's a little off putting. But nonetheless, I was like, okay, they're probably never gonna actually use this because they already said like it's not really economical, and also, they'd have to get the Teamsters to agree to this too, and the Teamsters only agreed originally because it actually, helped keep the drivers, exposure to liability down, and helped, show that their good driving habits, et cetera, et cetera. It'll probably be fine. But then maybe like a couple years ago now, I was talking to one of my friends who's a truck driver, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, we have those. They face us in the in the cab. It's actually really annoying." And I felt a feeling when I learned that again, if you've seen that movie Bridge on the River Kwai, where he's just like, "What have I done?" And then he collapses, and anyways, it's a very good movie. You should watch it. But um, yeah, I definitely was left with like, my God, what have I done? What have I done? Feeling when I learned that, and the silver lining is it sort of reinforced my desire to never ever work on anything like that ever again. Um, but you know, it also kind of left me with this feeling of like, well, what can I do? Right? What can I work on that is not going to turn out to be horrible? And I already am somebody that was like, I have definitely drifted. Again, I'm not trying to be super political, but I have definitely drifted further. I've always been liberal, and I have drifted more to the left as time has gone on, because of stuff like this. Um, and so I don't know. It, I already was I'm somebody that I tend to gravitate more towards things like academia and public service. Although I to my disappointment, technically when I worked at Sandia National Labs for a while as a postdoc, which I was actually technically not a government servant then, because of the way that's organized. I was actually a contractor, because they have the lab run by like a basically not exactly it's not well, it's the opposite of a shell company, right? It's the government owns the lab, but then they have the actual day-to-day operations contracted out to a private company, and I worked for that private company. It's kind of convoluted. There's reasons for it to be that way, some of which make sense, some of which are stupid. Um, at any rate, but so I'm naturally somebody that doesn't really gravitate towards private industry very much. Um, but when I was a teenager, I actually thought it would be kind of cool to like work for my dream was to work for somewhere like Scaled Composites, the Burt Rutan's little company that made the Spaceship One. But two things happened, right? One, the 2008 financial crisis made getting any job a lot harder, even because when I was a teenager, they all told us like, oh, you want to go into a STEM field, you won't have any problems. And then lo and behold, it turns out, well, if you want to be a tech bro or work for a tech bro, you can always find something. But if you want to work on anything else, post 2008, good luck. Um, and which it's gotten a lot better now, but it's also gotten a lot worse now because of stuff like this. So I don't know. Uh, it at least has validated, because I have a lot of friends that now have gone on to quote unquote data science, which is just applying machine learning to sort of business analytics problems for the most part. Like I cannot name a single person that I know that went into data science that does something other than an analytics for like finance or insurance. Oh no, I know one person that went to do analytics for mobile gaming to figure out how to make it more addicting. So it's it has at least validated my sort of perspective of like because I sometimes wonder if like I'm just having sour grapes about the fact that I didn't want to go do these things that some of those people do, and now those people are like making a good amount of money, and I'm like, well, I can't say I've lived a perfect life, but I feel like I have worked on things, with the exception of this summer internship, that were in some way, shape, or form beneficial to the world. um I can't say for sure if they will be long term. I just want to do my best, and yeah, I there's jobs, even a good number of jobs in private industry where you do things that are ethical and good for the world. And I want to live in a world where there's more of those and fewer of the jobs like the internship I did, and quite frankly, fewer tech bros. Um, because I don't know. I wish I had some salient conclusion other than "My God, what have I done?" But at least I didn't do very much of it. That's my only salient conclusion. And yeah, there's like they say, time's the most precious thing you have. Don't waste it. And honestly, time spent with family and friends is never wasted, and time spent working on something that'll help people is never wasted. But time spent on working on cameras that spy on putting AI into cameras that spy on people while they drive commercial vehicles was probably worse than wasted. But well, at least I learned from it. So, anyways, no real salient conclusion other than that. Just thought that would be a fun little story. So yeah, I'll upload. I guess this was semi-technical content, but I keep saying I'm going to upload video. I have a couple of little Blender animation centric videos planned. I'm going to try to get those up in the next couple of weeks. And yeah, all right. So peace.